Easy for listening. I was able to do it. Easy for dancing. I'm not a great lover of cats. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Not me. That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are. Hello and welcome to Shadowboxing. Today I got a real shadowboxer on the show. He's not a politician, he's just an everyday person, Scott Bartle. Scott, you took on the Australian government, as I understand.
Yes.
Apart from the government, you also took on the Queen and then also the Governor Generals of Australia. So what's going on? Tell us.
Well, I suppose traces back to the importation of my Chevrolet Corvette from the States.
That beautiful blue car.
Yes, thank you. The first alarm bells sounded with the importation, trying to get the approval from the Department of Transport, which at the time I believed I needed.
But it's usually just a routine thing. So
Yep.
what went wrong with your importation project?
the guidelines that I was presented by the Department of Transport were seemingly straightforward. It asked for evidence of was the car modified to determine the year of manufacture, and if it fell before 1989,
Yes.
to be a classic or a historic, or whether it was after 1989, in which they'd class it as a newly manufactured car. So of course
So
mine
which
was
category?
mine
yours?
was yeah, well mine was 1959. It had some restorations done, and I
Beautiful.
argued it's a restored car.
Yes.
And I was citing from the guidelines that were provided, and ultimately those same guidelines that were quoted from on 2 occasions to refuse my import approval were pulled out from me and said, no, you can't rely on those. Now just that alone, to have it cited from and said, no, you can't import because of this paragraph and this paragraph, and then, no, sorry, you actually can't use that document anymore, it's not law, that was just...
Raising the alarm bell for you.
It certainly was.
I heard that they got some problem with your air conditioning.
That came a little bit later.
Oh, later.
Now, ironically, I only learnt about this air conditioning issue once the car was in Australia.
Oh.
Now, it wasn't that... I mean, I was doing my homework and asking what fees and charges were required. So I knew I'd be up for GST, I knew I'd be up for luxury car tax. But my car arrived, and then I get presented with this other one for air conditioning, a pre-charged equipment license. Now, I subsequently found out that there's a lot of people who are actually paying mechanics to go and have the gas removed from their car in order to avoid having to pay this pre-charged equipment license.
Yes.
Or at least that's my belief of the situation. And so I went, what's this license actually going to do? I mean, if there are other guys just pulling the gas out, ultimately you're just going to go put the gas back in.
So why do I need a license for that?
What's really happening? And so that was really what pushed me over the edge, that made me start questioning some of these other taxes.
It's not the issue of the money, because you love the car, I believe.
Sure.
So if I like something, I really want to have it here. So I'm prepared to go and pay what I need to pay. So what have you find in this process alarming? Not the money side, because you can afford it, that's why you're doing it.
Well, that was it. I literally had the check basically written. I'm happy to pay it. And what I started to find was that who I was going to be paying it to wasn't who I thought it was.
Well, how is that? I mean, it's pretty simple, straightforward. We're paying the taxes to the government of Australia. Well, that's not that simple.
There's the starting point. So the first step for me, I actually came across, we look in the Constitution and you look at the name of government, and it clearly says on a number of different places, Government of the Commonwealth.
So the Constitution, we're talking about the Australian Constitution, issued in 1900 in England.
Yes, it's an act of the Parliament of the UK, and within that act is the Constitution that we use here in Australia. Looks like we've got a rule book for government.
Yes.
And in there we see the name for government, and I'm going, well, currently I'm getting mail from this organisation called the Australian Government,
And the Constitution names this one.
Government of the Commonwealth.
It's not even similar.
No.
It is two different things.
The Commonwealth appears to be the people. And so where we see these organisations where the Commonwealth is removed, it's like, is the people being pulled out of that group, that organisation, that thing. And if that's the case, I kept looking and I found the Parliament of the Commonwealth in the Constitution that specifically says there will be a Parliament known as the Parliament or the Parliament of the Commonwealth.
And now how are we calling our Parliament?
Currently in Canberra there's this thing called the Parliament of Australia. Again, the Commonwealth is missing.
Not there. So what's going on in here?
Well,
is this just playing with the words, or the words should have some meaning for us?
One would think that the Constitution is a pretty important document, and that the words that are defined and laid out in there are pretty important.
Should be followed.
They even have a section in the back, paragraph 128, that describes what needs to take place or how you go about altering that Constitution. It shall only be altered in the following manner.
And how can we alter the Constitution?
Well, first thing is that the proposed bill has to pass through both houses of the Parliament.
Yes.
Now the question comes up as to which Parliament. Does it pass through the Parliament of Australia, the one currently in Canberra, or does it pass through the one in the earlier part of that document that says the Parliament of the Commonwealth? So there's a few little inconsistencies that are starting to stick out and go, that's not making sense. Let's start asking some questions, and all the way along in my approach with Customs, for example, and various other ministers of the Australian government have been just to ask questions.
About what?
About whether the Australian government is legitimate or whether we should be looking for the government of the Commonwealth.
But they may say to you it's insane to ask this question because it's rather obvious. We are the government, you are our subject, and you do what I'm saying to you, and that's it, end of story.
And yet, what if they weren't? What if there was, for example, a company that was called the Commonwealth of Australia that sat in Washington and registered with the Securities Exchange Commission?
In the United States?
There appears to be an entity registered with the Securities Exchange Commission called the Commonwealth of Australia.
In Washington, D.C., in the capital of the United States.
Yeah.
That sounds strange.
And one can go to the Securities Exchange Commission website, sec.gov, look for company listings. Now, companies are going to be listed under company listings.
Not under government listing.
I didn't see it
no
under...
such thing is in the Securities Commission listing the government, listing companies.
That's a very good point. I didn't see it listed under government listings, I see it listed under company listings. So we go in there and we type in Commonwealth.
So our little country is a company?
It appears that way.
That's very strange, Scott.
Now,
you really mean what you say? Because people who are watching us may just think, this guy is completely lulu. What's going on?
Well, the evidence is there. Now, what that does is it says we need to start asking a few more questions around that. Let's not just take it on its face value.
Yes.
Who can we find, who can we ask to see if that's really what's happening? Now, some of the people that I've asked about this have included the Governor-General, the Governor of Western Australia, Minister for Justice. Other friends of mine have asked Julia Gillard, Bob Carr, Nicola Roxon.
And what was the answer you got from these guys?
No answer.
No answer.
Not even a response to say, oh, we've got your letter, we'll get back to you. Nothing.
So people ignoring you.
Today,
what do you think why? Why this silence is happening?
Well, if you sit in court and you don't answer and you don't respond to charges that are laid against you, they attach a meaning to that.
Such as?
Default judgment. Anyone who's been kicked out of their house as a result of a mortgage foreclosure through default judgment will certainly attest to that, that if you don't attend and put up a defence, then you're labelled as guilty. And that's a principle that's applied worldwide. So as far as that as a principle, let's employ that and let's put that to these ministers and put the question to them.
And let's see what the answer is.
And if we
But
don't,
silence is not an answer, or it is an answer.
it is an answer. Unless, of course, that principle of default judgment is suddenly invalid, and there'll be a lot of people lining up to get their houses back. So you've got to have it one way or the other. You can't have it both.
Where is the headquarters of this company? Is it Canberra?
Its business address is listed as the embassy, Australian Embassy in Washington. And yet there are filings that relate back to Canberra.
So who is Canberra reporting to the Washington headquarters of the company, or the government, are politicians making a report to the company? So what do you think? What's happening?
Well, there's a few little bits of information on the SEC website that are essentially instructions to the filing or the filers of annual reports and prospectus items with this Securities Exchange Commission that are directing certain things be included in these annual reports or the filings that are registered. And I've heard arguments from a lot of people that suggest that the company is just a tool of the Australian government for the purposes of trading bonds.
No, but you don't need trading bonds a tool. The government can sell, buy whatever they like.
One would think so.
They can do it. Scott, we have to go for a short break, but stay with us, because after the break we're coming back with much, much more with Scott. Hello and welcome back to Shadowboxing. My guest is Scott, and we continue our discussions on the very interesting issue. Are we have a government in Australia, or a company is running this country? Scott,
Right.
what do you think?
Well, we go back to this company that's
Registered in the United
registered
States?
under the company filings in Washington. There's talk, and this I don't have the information on. As far as I know, it was registered in 1929, that is. And then either that was rejected and it was refiled in around 1933 or 34. Now, whether that's the case, I don't still have the piece of paperwork to say that. And I base a lot of my work off the questions that arise from some of these things. Such that if this company is set up for the trading of bonds, presumably government bonds, then the prerequisite of that is surely government. And in Australia, to have your government,
Yes,
you need the administrator of the government, which is your Governor-General.
that's true.
Now, that position is laid out in the Constitution, and specifically the letters patent that constitute the office of Governor-General. And in 1900, Queen Victoria put those in place. And a very interesting paragraph was her reservation of power and authority to the heirs and successors of herself for the alteration, amendment or revocation of those letters patent. So basically she's saying that we reserve the power and authority to revoke, alter or amend these letters patent constituting the office of Governor-General to ourselves or our heirs and successors.
Nothing wrong with that?
Seems quite good.
Yes.
And those letters patent are issued under the Great Seal of the United Kingdom, that lion and the unicorn.
Yes.
It's the same seal that we see above the courthouses in a lot of the places around the country.
Yes.
Ironically, Customs House in Sydney and Mackay and a few other places around the country, we see the lion and the unicorn. And then in 1984, there's another set of letters patent that are issued under the Great Seal of Australia, the kangaroo and the emu. However, there's a slight little complication that comes in there which raises another set of questions, is that kangaroo and the emu is now registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office as a trademark.
For a company.
Well, at the moment I'd just see it as a trademark.
Yes.
Now typically you see companies like Coca-Cola register their trademarks, McDonald's register them trademarks.
Yes.
Companies ordinarily register trademarks. I don't see too many governments registering trademarks, in as much as they have, in theory, laws to protect against people using that. And in Australia, from my research of the Crimes Act of 1914, there's a paragraph in there specifically that refers to the passing off a mark or a seal as if
Like
it were
government? Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Then you have to go to jail.
Yep.
And you will.
Exactly. So to me, the protection for using a seal that belongs to government and counterfeiting it in that sense,
It's a crime.
the protection is in the Crimes Act. I thought, well,
So why do you need
you don't
patented?
don't need copyright or trademark
No.
registration. That seems to be the realm of companies. So there's a few dots to be joined in terms of these questions that are being asked. And so we go back to these letters patent of 1984 and go, well, why are they seemingly issued under a Great Seal of Australia that's a trademarked seal? Is that the royal seal that would put the royal representative in place, being the Governor-General? The Queen's representative would, I'd imagine, use the same seal as the Queen.
That's correct.
Is that really what's happening? Does the royals issue this document? And so my question has been to those in government and customs who still have my car, is were these letters patent of 1900 revoked by an heir and successor to the late Queen Victoria under the full reservation of power and authority that was reserved back in 1900?
Because we're missing that. No one told us that's been revoked ever.
Yep.
So what's going on? What do you think what's going on in here?
If that isn't the case, and we actually have those letters patent of 1900 are still valid and are still supported by the Queen in England, then we have the situation where that office is vacant and we have potentially got another office that potentially reports to the Washington with their trademarked logo and is operating in very much like a corporation here in Australia. That puts us with two systems. Now, the two systems runs parallel to Government of the Commonwealth, Australian Government, Parliament of the Commonwealth, Parliament of Australia. The evidence for two systems is stacking up quite nicely, and there's a few dots to be joined. And yet all of these questions that I'm firing off to the likes of Customs to show the GST Act, the Act for Luxury Car Tax, the Act that even put Customs into existence, did that get royal assent by a Governor-General properly commissioned and of the office of the Queen?
And if not?
And we're talking an heir and successor to the late Queen Victoria. We're not talking any other pretend Queen that may or may not exist.
So what about this pretend Queen of Australia? Tell us about this.
Well, there appears from research that I've come across that in 1973 an act of the Parliament of Australia, again, which Parliament were we dealing with, created or was the introduction of the term Queen of Australia. Now, there are many who actually argue that the Queen of Australia is not actually the real flesh and blood heir and successor to the late Queen Victoria, but a corporate fiction, a legal entity, a statutory entity, one that's been created on paper but doesn't actually exist. Now, this is all sounding really hard to believe in many cases, and you think, how is this possible?
Wild, yes.
It
have
is.
to admit that.
And it's like, what is really happening here? And again, put these questions to those in these positions of power, authority. Ask the Governor, could you please give me a straight answer to whether those letters patent were revoked?
And you got no answer from them.
Nothing. And this is seemingly happening across all levels of government, from a parking fine to rates to departments to customs to the Minister for Justice. At all levels, all the way across the board, these questions that are being asked are meeting silence.
So it's probable now we are living in a proxy government and a proxy country.
Well, if that principle of not getting any answer has any merit, which I believe it does, then yeah, that's exactly what it's shaping up like.
So skeptics will say that it's all technicality. Who cares about it? Do you think anyone cares about this one, apart from you, in Australia?
It has actually been very encouraging, the amount of emails that I've had come in following the launch of that documentary, congratulating me and supporting me, with emails that have come in to say my child was taken off me by this department who appears to be just a company. I've had to pay this to this department for this reason, and yet when I ask them for evidence of their legitimacy, I got nothing. So the emails have been flooding in of people in similar situations, and actually congratulating me on, I suppose, taking this step. And I don't do that to big note myself. In many ways, where I've gone appears to be bigger than the issue of just me getting my car back.
That sounds like bigger than Ben-Hur itself.
It's a fairly monumental kind of subject.
So what people can do, what do you think was the solution is?
Well, I've come at this from asking questions, which I believe is something that we're all entitled to do. So I would suggest arming yourselves with some of the knowledge of those original founding documents for the letters patent, or even just using my documentary as a tool and saying to your local member, could you please comment on this? Are these questions valid? What legitimacy lies behind this? Could you offer some comment or suggestion as to the validity of that? And if it comes back to those governors and the Governor General and the validity of their office, we could be in for trouble.
That could be very, very interesting. But two last things, just quickly. One is, if we going to succeed and we became a republic, probably the whole issue is just go away.
In many ways, yes. It appears if we've got this dual situation at the moment, either one of them can't make up their mind as to who's who. Do we have this constitutional monarchy that we were brought up with, or do we have this corporate government? If we were to bring in a republic, yeah, probably that whole hassle goes away. Though then we're back into a whole kettle of fish of what do we replace it with? And there are probably many people in this country who are far more well versed with the replacement system than I am. But it does raise another whole kettle of fish of questions.
Tell me, the money, what we're using in Australia, what is the problem with that one, using the same analogy as you used for the company?
Well, my belief is it's not backed by anything of intrinsic value, like gold and silver. Within the Constitution, it clearly lays out that
on our Australian Constitution, issued in 1900.
In the Constitution of 1900.
Which is the only one, what we know, hopefully.
Yes, and any one that was altered in accordance with the provisions within it. It clearly lays out that nothing shall be coined for the payment of debts other than gold or silver. Now, if our currency is not in any way backed by gold or silver, well, are we breaching the elements laid out in the Constitution? There's another question that's unanswered. And there's probably plenty more people who can dig a lot deeper on that one, on the banking issues, the Reserve Bank of Australia, whether that's a company or whether that is real government. Where does it end?
I don't know, Scott, but thanks for coming on to Shadowboxing. It was nice talking to you. I wish you all the best for your real shadowboxing. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you.
And please come back to watch Shadowboxing next week. Same channel, same time.